Welcome to the first video in our Garden Talk series for the Northwoods Community Garden. My name is Mike Hazel. I'm the Vice President of the Community Garden Board, and I'm also the 2021 Garden Manager. This community garden that we've built is going to be a happy, healthy place to grow nutritious food for the community. So this garden is going to be more than just a community garden. We're going to have demonstration gardens, permaculture elements, herbs, flower beds, perennials, gathering spaces, art installations, lots of educational opportunities and chances for the community to gather and build community together. We're partnering with ArtStart, Nicolet College, UW Extension, and a number of other community businesses. We expect to have tie-ins to Project North and the Earth Day Sustainability Fair. So we're looking for this community to be a hub of sustainability in the Northwoods. So in addition to being an awesome community garden. So since our first meeting in April, we got a group of people together. We've formed a nonprofit. We've made arrangements with Nicolet College and ArtStart. We've broken ground at our site. We've done fundraising, and we've got a deer fence up. So we made a lot of progress in under 9 months. We're going to spend the winter working on videos like this, more fundraising, some construction, and then in the spring we'll finish building the garden and be ready for gardeners for sure by around Memorial Day. So for those who don't know, the site is out at Nicolet College. We're in the big field out front by Highway G. The garden is going to be in the northeast corner up by that big windmill and the Renewable Energy Center. The access to the garden is down that little road on the north side of the field. It's a one-way road, and there's a little small 10-car parking lot right by the windmill. So that's general access to the garden is that way. So in the garden we've got 48 beds. The size of the beds is 10 feet by 20 feet, and they're in the ground. So they're not raised beds like in some community gardens or some gardens. So they're flat in the ground, and your bed borders right up against your neighbor. There are grassy paths between the beds, so everyone will have access to their bed via a grassy path. Since your bed borders on your neighbor's plot, there aren't paths between the plots, and you can make a path wherever within your garden you want it to be. So you get to decide in your layout how many paths you want, how many rows you want, where you want your plants to be, where you want to walk. Since you are neighboring right up against your neighbor's garden, you got to be sure that your plants aren't shading your neighbor's. So all the tall stuff like sunflowers and tomatoes and pole beans and corn, you need to orient that in your garden so that it doesn't shade your neighbor's plot or they'll get mad at you. You can also build raised beds within your garden if you want, as long as they're not treated material. So you can build raised beds, you could build edges to keep the grass from growing into your bed if you want. So those are options to you. So out at the garden we'll have city water with a number of spigots, so you'll be able to water your garden as often as you want. But the hoses need to be returned to the spigots at the end of when you're done using them. So you can't leave a hose hooked up to sprinklers or drip irrigation or something like that. You can have drip irrigation. You actually can't have sprinklers because we don't want people spraying your own plot and getting other neighboring plots wet too. But when you water, you have to put the hose away when you're done. So you can water while you're there. You can use drip irrigation if you want, but you have to put away the hose when you're done. Around the garden, as I mentioned, we'll have all of these public plantings. We'll have rhubarb bushes, or rhubarb plants, berry bushes, herbs, some of the more challenging plants for in your own garden, like mints. We'll have those out in the public areas. We'll probably have a pumpkin patch for the kids, so you can have your jack-o'-lanterns or go harvest jack-o'-lanterns out in the pumpkin patch. So a lot of that will be publicly available. If there's a class going on that needs some of that produce for like a canning class or something, we'll please just respect any signage we put up to reserve produce. So out at the community garden, there'll be a lot of classes happening, both from Nicolet and ArtStart and community garden sponsored classes. Just be aware that some might be paid for classes. So if you see one happening, before you just sneak in the back and start listening, just check if it's a class that you needed to pay for or reserve. Another thing to be aware of is that the public safety department here at Nicolet occasionally needs to close down Nicolet Way. That's that one-way road that we have to access the garden through. Sometimes they're doing training for off-duty firefighters or police officers. So if the road is blocked off, we can't get to the garden that way, and you have to go to the south end of the field and park at one of the other parking lots and walk across the field. So a large feature of this garden is permaculture. In addition to the plots, we'll have all kinds of pollinator plantings and berry bushes and animal habitat and exciting things happening all around the periphery and within some of the garden beds. So there'll be a whole lot of nature happening in this garden. This might be a little more wild. We'll have a lot more diversity, a lot more life, a lot more plants, a lot more flowers, a lot more bugs, a lot more birds, just a whole lot of life. In conjunction with that permaculture principle, we want this garden to be organic or better. So we want it to be clean and healthy and chemical free. So in doing so, if you even have to use fertilizers and pesticides and fungicides, use OMRI certified, that's OMRI certified organics products. Ideally, you want to use any of that stuff, but at least at a minimum, we want to be organic. In conjunction with that, no herbicides can be used in the garden plots at all. So the products that you bring into the garden are very important. If you bring in like compost or potting soil or things like that, they need to be organic. Also, a lot of people have or know somebody with a horse or cows, and they think they can just bring in the compost or the manure from that. But unfortunately, the chemical companies have come up with these really nifty, well, they believe they're really nifty herbicides that keep the hay field looking good. But those persistent herbicides can go through the gut of a cow or a horse, get composted in their manure, and then still kill your garden for up to 4 years. So the risk is if you bring in some horse manure from your neighbor that you think is clean, and it kills your garden, and you don't know why, and you get discouraged, and then you don't renew your plot next year. Someone else gets that plot, and it's still getting killed by that herbicide. So we have to keep the cow and horse manure out unless it comes from a commercially sourced, a clean commercial source. Let's see, so there's a number of things that we'd like to keep out of the garden. The biggest one physically is deer. Luckily, we built a deer fence already. We'll be adding rabbit fencing to that in the spring. So we'll have deer and bunnies taken care of, we think. Dogs are probably the next biggest thing to keep out of the garden. Unless it's a registered official service animal or something, there's no dogs allowed in the garden. So we want to keep the gates shut so that all the other dogs running around out in the area don't just sneak in on us and start running and trampling all the plants. Tobacco is also not allowed in the garden. And unlike, there's an actual reason for community gardens. There's a tobacco mosaic virus that can come in on cigarettes, and it affects tomato plants and other plants in that family, and it's really hard to get rid of once it's in the garden. So no tobacco. Another one that is unfortunate, recently we've got a new invasive in Oneida County called the jumping worm, but they live on the surface of the ground. They eat all kinds of organic matter, and they're asexual, so it only takes one egg, and we can have an infestation. So unfortunately, because of that, we can't allow anyone to transplant any soil from outside of the garden into the garden, or outside of Nicolay property into the garden. Also, anything that's been touching the ground, like your compost pile at home, perhaps, or leaves that somebody rakes up and puts in a nice bag by the curbside for you, that could have worms in it or worm eggs, and we just can't take the risk of getting that into the garden. We have to protect Nicolay College from the worm. Now, those same materials, leaves and stuff off the ground, if it's on Nicolay College property, then we could bring it in. So we can harvest leaves from the campus and put them into the garden. So we got to keep the jumping worm out. So there's a list of plants that also are prohibited from growing in your garden plots. They're the really hard to get rid of persistent spreading plants like peppermint, spearmint, a lot of the mint plants, Jerusalem artichokes, horseradish. So there's a list of things like that you can't plant in your plots. For the herbs especially, we'll have them planted elsewhere in the garden. So you can go find peppermint somewhere in the plantings, but just don't put it in your own plot. There's some things we do want to keep in the garden. So we want life in the garden, both animal and plant life. So we're going to hopefully have all kinds of honeybees and pollinators and little birds and big birds, snakes, hawks, stuff like that. Unfortunately, we'll probably have voles and chipmunks and ground squirrels in there. So that's why we want to encourage the hawks and the snakes to be in the garden, because hopefully they'll scare away those little critters. So one of my biggest rules is don't kill snakes. If you're afraid of them, that's great. Go run around and run away, but don't kill them, please, because they're going to hopefully keep away the voles and the chipmunks. The thing to keep in the garden is your neighboring garden plot's vegetables. So you can pick all your own vegetables, of course, and pick all your weeds and take care of your plot, but don't go picking anyone else's veggies. Even if you think they forgot a tomato and, oh, they'll never miss it, or I'm sure they forgot and it's just going to go to waste and it's half rotten anyway, you can't take it. They might be saving it for seed. You don't know it. It's probably going to go to waste, but you don't know. So you don't want to be sneaking into someone else's plot and taking their veggies. So, and you do need to take care of your plot. So keep it weeded. Keep weeds from going to seed is the main thing in the weed department. But if you don't take care of your plot or plant to your plot, then after a little bit of time, it'll be handed off to somebody else who will care for it and love it in your absence. And in general, for other services, so we'll have an area near the entry that's more ADA compliant with a hard surface, probably crushed red granite. So you'll be able to get from the parking lot into the beds if you need a harder surface like that. We'll have a few raised beds also for folks who have bending issues or need a higher place to garden. In that area with more access, we'll have some of the demonstration gardens and our garden shed. In the shed, we'll have some larger tools like wheelbarrows, things you don't want to put in the trunk of your car. We'll probably have some hand tools, but we're not going to try to stock a whole inventory of hand tools. So there might be something there to borrow and use in your plot, but probably want to bring your favorite tool from home and bring it back and forth with you. But keep it clean so that the jumping worm eggs from your garden don't come out to the community garden with you. So we'll also have a porta potty out at the garden so that you can take care of all your bathroom needs. We won't have garbage pickup, so you have to take all your trash home with you, including any weeds that have gone to seed that we don't want to put in the compost bin, or any diseased plants that shouldn't go in the compost pile. So take those home with you, please, and dispose of them properly. We'll have picnic tables, some shady spots to hide from the sun, and some gathering areas. In the future, I'm hoping to have like pizza ovens and all kinds of neat community stuff out there. But this first year, we're just hoping to get the garden up and running well. So the cost of the community garden plots are $40 for that 10 by 20 foot bed, plus 4 hours of volunteer time over the course of the season. So if you're interested in getting a garden plot, send an email to northwoodscommunitygarden@gmail.com and you'll be put on a list. As soon as we have the official sign-up form completed, we'll send it out to everyone so you can pay your $40 and be officially signed up. This video, along with other information, will be posted at northwoodscommunitygarden.com. And until next month's video comes out, we'll see you in the garden.